So, welcome everybody to the plotting shed. Come on in, take a seat, get yourself a cuppa and a biscuit.
We are going to be covering first chapters, everything that you need to include to establish them, set them up, and where to start. And there are a few things that each chapter requires, and this is what we're going to be covering and looking at. We're going to be introducing our character, establishing the setting, setting the tone and mood, identifying the voice and style, and including a hook. But before we can do any of that, where do we need to start our chapter?
You can start in a few different places, and if there's anything that we haven't mentioned, feel free to add it to the comments because we want to know your opinion as well. One option is you can start in media res, which literally means in the midst of things, in the middle of things. It's a great option. It can create a lot of urgency. You're basically pulling your reader into the middle of a very urgent moment, like a battle or something like that. But it can also leave you with a lot of information to give the reader because you haven't been able to set up their history, backstory, and who the character is essentially. So do be careful if you're using in media res of information dumping.
To avoid having that info dump or starting too late, you can always start at the beginning, which sounds like a pretty good place to start. So starting at the beginning means really starting just before the inciting incident and having the time to set up the characters and explore who they are. So for example, in the locked room thriller that I'm currently revising, I start with my characters on the dock, waiting to board a ferry to the island that they are soon going to be trapped on and have to survive on. And by starting with them traveling to the island, I have the time then to introduce the characters, set them up, and kind of explore what the story is and what's going to happen before it all takes place.
Or you could foreshadow, and this is where something like a prologue is really useful. So foreshadowing, I do that at the moment in the novel that I'm currently writing. So I used the prologue to promise something to the reader that is coming. This particular incident happens about three-quarters of the way through. It's very dramatic. And so by giving the reader a snapshot of this moment before they jump into this character's life, I'm basically saying to them, keep reading because something is going to happen that's going to blow your mind.
And similarly to foreshadowing, you can also start with a flashback, which works kind of in the opposite way. And the flashback will show something that has already happened that has now set up the story. And it's giving you a taste of maybe a character's backstory or an important plot device, an event that has now set the way and the path for the story you're going to read.
So you might be wondering how to know where to start in this story. And that is quite a difficult question. Like, where do I start in this story? And sometimes you might write a novel, you might write the first draft, reread it, and think, actually, that wasn't the best place to start. I don't need those first 5 chapters, for example. I've certainly done that before. So essentially, what you need to ask yourself is, how much information does the reader actually need at this time? If you open up too late in a story, you may not have enough setup, as we said in media res, and there could be a potential fast pace. That might work for you. It might work for your genre, it might work for your style of writing and your voice, but the opposite can also be true, can't it, Isobelle?
Yes. If you open too early, that means that there's going to be too much setup and it's taking too long then for the story to actually get going, and it's going to slow down the pace of your story. So it is a very, very fine balance of trying to know exactly where to start.
Yeah. And I would also say that you're going to learn a lot of this stuff from reading. Like read and read and read books you like, books you don't like, and discover what your favorite way of being introduced to a world is, because that is the thing that'll teach you the most about writing. So when we're talking about a first paragraph in our first chapter, what does that need to include, Isobelle?
So really it includes 4 things, but we want to start with our character, with our protagonist, probably. Because by starting with a character and by starting with our main character, you're giving the reader someone to invest in emotionally and someone that they can care about immediately off the bat. And so by introducing your character, you're going to be establishing exactly who they are, what they want, which we will get into in a second. But you want to be setting up the type of person that that character is and what your reader can expect from them.
The next thing you want to do is establish your setting. So we're going to be digging deeper into setting in a minute as well. But essentially, you want to establish where you are and when you are in the world so that you can help your reader basically put their feet on the ground and discover what they're looking at.
You also want to establish the voice. And so this is the protagonist's point of view voice. This is also your style as the author, because it needs to be a style that's going to resonate with your reader so that they can immediately know what kind of story this is. Is it dark and twisted? Is it funny and lighthearted? What should they expect?
Mhm. And you can also raise a question. So what we mean by this is something to pull the reader in and make them want to read on. There are some really fantastic examples of this in fiction. And a question, when we say raise a question, it doesn't need to be a question in the text. You can make a statement, but what you're doing is making the reader ask a question to create that feeling of, I have to know the answer to this.
Yeah, creating that intrigue is just so important.
Yeah.
And so when you're creating your characters, the first thing you want to establish is, who are they? What's their name? Maybe what their place in the world is, like, are they a student? Are they a doctor? What kind of person are they? And establishing elements of their personality as well. Maybe there's something that can happen in that first chapter, in that first scene, that can establish if they are a good moral person, if they are someone who is down on their luck and really bitter about the world. Really give us a sense of who they are.
Yeah. Um, Essentially, you also want to create this snapshot of what is life as normal. So, what is life as normal for this one person? Do they get up every day and have breakfast and go to school? Is that life as normal? Or, do they get up every day and they go and learn how to fight in the army? Like, what is life for this one person? And we need to know that because we need to know how it's going to change in a little bit.
Yes, because by knowing who they are and what their normal life is, we can also understand what they want. Because what they want is going to really drive the rest of the story. Do they want to be better, smarter, more capable? Do they want something that's going to change their life and their current circumstances?
Yeah. The next question is kind of a tricky one. Why do we care? Why do we, as the reader, care about reading about this person, essentially? And that's when we come back to what we talked about before, which is raising that question, creating that intrigue. It's super important to do that so that the reader does care about this person and about moving forward with them. They don't have to be likable. None of your characters have to be likable, but they do have to be relatable so that we can follow them and want to follow them and want to care about them.
And that also comes as well from understanding what's holding them back. So it's one thing for them to want something and to want their circumstances to change. But why can't their circumstances change? Have they tried and it's failed? What do they need? What is stopping them from getting what they want? And how will everything that happens in the book be the answer to that?
Yeah. And moving on from that, what is their conflict? So, we've had what is holding them back, what is their conflict? So, what's the conflict with what's holding them back? Why can't they get what they want? And then we can move forward into your settings. So, we've talked about, introducing when are we and where are we? When are we? What era are you writing in? If you're writing, in the kind of world that we live in, if you're writing a fantastical story, indicate that too by explaining your setting and when we are. If you're writing something in sci-fi, you can kind of make it clear that we are billions of years in the future. There's lots of ways to describe when we are. And you can use things like your characters' names, the things that your characters are wearing, the setting, in terms of what they see around them. So if you were writing a fantasy, for example, you might be describing, New Zealand. If you're writing a sci-fi, you might be describing a spaceship, and all those things indicate when we are to the reader.
Yes. All of those descriptions as well also establish again what's normal. So it is depicting exactly what is regular and what these characters are used to in their everyday life. If everyone has access to flying vehicles, that's obviously normal. Or if it's the Victorian age, and there's such a distinction between the haves and the have-nots. You want to be establishing exactly what is normal in that world so that we can get a sense of time and place.
Yeah. And then there's culture versus geography. So these two things are obviously different. The geography of a place is very much that the river flows downwards from the mountain. And the culture of a place is that we have a festival in spring to celebrate such and such, or the food we eat is this. These two things are different, but they both merge together to create setting in a very real way. And you want to use both of them to help your reader really be placed within that world.
Because the setting has such a huge impact on a story, particularly in something like fantasy and science fiction or historical fiction. And that's something that you also need to explore. What is the setting impact on the character and on the wider world? Maybe there's political turmoil, and that means that everything in their world is a bit unstable at the moment, and there are riots and there's famine, and it's just a really bad time for everyone. What is the impact of that?
Yeah. Then we're thinking about story view versus world view, and you want to include both. So, story view is the world as it appears to your character, essentially, and world view is the world as it is. What I mean by that is that Isobelle and I can both visit the same place, the same exact field, for example, but that field, despite the very real facts about it, will look differently to both of us because we come from different places. Isobelle is from Australia. I am from the UK. We have different experiences in life and we are different ages. And so the way that we have a view of the world is different. So you want to include both of those things. The facts, the world view, the story view is how this looks to your character, essentially.
So we've got our character, we've got our setting, and now we need to establish the voice. And voice is something that's going to kind of bring together both of those elements. So firstly, you want to be establishing the tense and your point of view character. So generally speaking, the point of view character will be your main character, but you might also have multiple points of view, or you might have an omniscient point of view where you sort of jump between multiple people's heads and you're all knowing. Your tense is going to be past or present tense. And so it's important straight off the bat to establish which tense you're in and whose perspective this chapter or this story is coming from.
Language as well. And I don't mean, are you going to write in English or are you going to write in French? You're very welcome to use whatever language you feel suits. But I also mean the kind of language that you're going to use in terms of, are you going to use very formal language? Are you going to use colloquial language to help set the scene? So examples of books that do this well would be Train Spotting. There's lots of different ways to use language to create a world that is very kind of realistic and to set your character voice as well. Your voice as an author, especially, is kind of your thing. That's something that you have that nobody else has. So when you're settling into your voice, really allow yourself to do what feels natural because nobody else can do that. And I would always argue that although other people's work is very beautiful, your voice is unique. So don't try and copy other people's work. You'll find it very difficult. Just allow yourself to use the language that comes to you naturally when writing.
So following on from that, we have tone and mood, and these can be created through the language that you're using and also from your point of view character. So your character's point of view is going to hugely influence how they view the world, and from that, the kind of tone and mood and atmosphere that's going to create. Your language will also have the same impact because the kind of word choices that you have, the way that you describe things, that's all going to play together to create that kind of tone and mood. And it's really important that you're setting that up quickly because you don't want to mislead your reader by having chapters that don't fully align with the overall tone. So if you're starting off really lighthearted in your first chapter and then it all goes downhill and becomes really dark in the next chapter, they might feel a little bit blindsided and you don't want that.
Yeah. And I think with tone and mood as well, you can play with it, have a little bit of fun with it. I think Terry Pratchett is a really good example of that. You can write about serious subjects, but in a fun way.
Mm.
So don't feel, I think, that you are like stuck to a genre convention with that because you're not. And in the same kind of way with style, you might be writing an epic fantasy and think that that requires you to write in a very Tolkien-esque way. That's not the case. Writing is art, right? And if we don't kind of push those boundaries and explore every now and then, it won't kind of move forward um, in creativity. So your style can be flowery, your style can be spare, it could be very Orwellian. You know, you could simply say what you mean in short, sharp sentences and then move on. And you might find that your style fits a particular genre very well, and that you're very comfortable with that. So if you write very short, sharp sentences, you might find that crime is very comfortable for you to write because the pacing lends itself to that kind of style, essentially.
Yes. And it's also the same in literary devices. So these are things like metaphors, similes, alliteration, and they also fit together with style and genre conventions because you see them sometimes more often in things like literary fiction or romance, maybe historical fiction, and something like crime may not be quite as literary. I don't want to say it's not literary, but those devices don't typically come up as much.
You know that I love a simile and a
Yeah.
metaphor. I lean hard into them as a reader and a writer. Like, love it. Um, yeah, that's what I'm looking for. So we're just, everybody's different. Everybody has different tastes. And this is another reason why, and we'll say it many times on this channel in the plotting shed, there's so much blanket information online, like blanket statements. This is how you write. But writing is art. This is a subjective, creative thing. So yes, we're all going to have different opinions about it, and that's all fine. We move on then to genre conventions. When you're thinking about your voice, the best thing to do is to think, okay, is there any genre conventions that I would like to adhere to here? Genre conventions, when you're thinking about voice, can set up an expectation for your reader. The best thing to do, if you're not sure what the conventions in your genre are, read the books in that genre and see what that kind of voice is and what they are doing as well that you might like to have a go at too. This is different to style and language in your natural kind of writing. Genre conventions, when you're establishing voice, are to do with kind of all of the things we've discussed, but it won't change your writing style, essentially. It'll just help you understand how best to communicate with your reader.
And it also just comes with time and practice. And
Oh,
writing in multiple genres as well can help you see similarities and differences between them all.
yeah.
Okay, so now we've set up the story, we've got our first paragraph, we are in the thick of it, and then we hit the inciting incident. This is the big event. And so, Rach, what is the inciting incident?
The inciting incident is essentially the moment that makes a character move forward into their new life. They are leaving life as normal and they are moving forward into a new life. They may not want that new life. They may be stoked for that new life, but essentially it's the thing that is driving that character forward.
Definitely. And this is obviously going to have a huge impact on that main character because it's really just turned their whole world upside down, for better or worse. And so it should be something that is life altering in some way. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they've won the jackpot and now they're a millionaire or that they actually are the king's daughter. It doesn't have to be anything big like that, but it should be a chance for them to get what they want, which is what we talked about much earlier on. It's giving them the chance to pursue their goal and to have the life and be the person that they ultimately can be.
Yes. And I think Legends and Lattes is a really nice example of doing the kind of inciting incident well, because it doesn't have to be this kind of huge thing. It doesn't have to be huge stakes. It can be a personal decision. So in Legends and Lattes, the inciting incident is when Viv decides that she wants to open a coffee shop. That's wicked. That's a lovely inciting incident. You also get a vibe of the whole novel from that. These stakes are low and it's a cozy read for that reason. And so why is it the inciting incident? So why have you chosen that thing, essentially, is the question to ask. check that it is going to drive your character forward in the story. Otherwise, it may not be the inciting incident. It may just be an incident.
Yes, because you want your inciting incident to have very specific result. Your inciting incident needs to kick into motion the rest of the plot. So if that inciting incident doesn't happen, nothing in the rest of the story takes place.
Mhm.
And so that's why that inciting incident is so important, because it really does propel everything else forward and it sets up the rest of the novel. So your inciting incident should result in your protagonist either willingly or unwillingly getting involved in the overall plot of the story and taking that leap.
Yes. So here's a tricky question. When should it take place? And the reason this is a tricky question is because there's so many books out there that detail plotting a novel at length. You can get all sorts of books that do this, and they will break it down sometimes into very tiny steps. And some of them can be very specific about when this should take place. For me, I think that, if we're looking at kind of a map of a novel as 100%, let's talk to an inciting incident happening between 15 to 25% of that novel, right? Because we want the life as normal at the beginning. We do need that snapshot. And if we are kind of getting pushed forward into a new version of a story, it needs to be between those things. I do believe that everybody has this kind of intrinsic understanding of narrative and story. And I know this from just speaking to like my 5-year-old niece. And if I ask her to tell me a story, she will tell me a story. There will be an inciting incident and a climax and the falling resolution because we are all brought up on stories. We are told stories when we're children. We tell each other stories. That's how we communicate. So you'll find that when you write, you're probably creating an inciting incident between those kind of barriers anyway. So I wouldn't worry too much until you're reading your second draft and saying, okay, do I think this is coming at the right time? Is this the right thing to do? Has this moved my character forward?
Yes. And also the timing of your inciting incident can also be very dependent on genre conventions. So
Mhm.
in something like fantasy, it's really common for the inciting incident to happen later, not much later, but for there to be more setup because there's so much that you need to establish. You need to introduce a whole world and a whole cast of characters. Whereas in something like a thriller, because the point is the thrills, it's very common then for the inciting incident to take place sooner. It doesn't have to, but it's very common. So in a lot of my books, I have very quick inciting incidents. They happen easily in the first 15% of the book. And sometimes it's in the second chapter and there isn't a lot of setup. So it really just depends on your genre and your approach and what that story calls for.
If you are someone who adheres to those books that are very specific about every step, that's cool, that's fine. But if you are someone who is trying to do that and you are struggling with it and finding it difficult to do, I would tell you to put the book down, take a deep breath, and step away for a moment and have a go at doing it without it, because you might actually surprise yourself and show yourself that you know a lot more about how a story is structured than you think.
So we hope this has been incredibly helpful and wish you all the luck with writing your first chapter and hopefully you will enjoy it as much as we do.
Yes, and don't forget to subscribe, comment, and basically say hello. We would love to hear from you. And come back to the plotting shed another time.
We'll see you next time.